right, come on out. Good morning. So we're delighted to have some real leaders from innovation and the grid with us this morning and to hear what's new, what's happening, and how we can all get involved. So I'm going to actually ask each of our panelists this morning to just introduce themselves and tell us what's top of mind for you also. Karen, can you start?
Sure. My name is Karen Wayland. I'm the very new executive director of the Clean Energy Project, which is a nonprofit in Nevada that advocates for clean energy policy, both in Nevada, the West, and hopefully more nationally going forward. And I just joined after spending 3.5 years working at the Department of Energy, where I established the state and local policy team for Secretary Moniz, and I also was one of the lead authors in the 2 installments of the Quadrennial Energy Review, where we looked at energy infrastructure around the country and what the challenges and really exciting opportunities are in that space.
Hi, I'm Denny McGinn. I'm a recovering sailor. I left the administration as Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy Installations and Environment in January. There's some sort of a change happening in Washington. And now I'm a member of the Board of Directors and Senior Advisor for Customer First Renewables, a strategic energy advisory service that focuses on the customer to get everybody into large-scale renewable energy. Look forward to having a chat with these great folks.
Perfect.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Melnight. I run a team at PG&E called Strategy and Policy. PG&E is you probably know, we're a gas and electric combined utility across northern and central California, covering about 70,000 square miles, and very proud to be the home of probably about 25% of all the nation's rooftop solar installations and 20% of all the electric vehicles charging off of our network.
Terrific, thanks. So those are some good things that are top of mind. So this space is changing very quickly. I'm from Hawaii. So in Hawaii, for example, we went from about 8% renewable energy 9 years ago to about 27% today. So really extraordinary growth. And our biggest power plant in Hawaii is distributed solar. So how do we sort of go from a place where we have power plants to solar and distributed energy across the grid? You have to have innovation, right? I mean, you have to be able to incorporate new technologies and new ideas and new ways of thinking in particular into institutions that manage the grid. So we're going to talk a little bit about how the grid powers innovation. And Steve, I'd love to start with some of your thoughts around actually what you guys are doing. Do you think that the PG&E grid powers innovation, and how so? Can you give a couple examples?
Well, you know, I think that, look, you talked about the transition that's underway, and it's an incredibly exciting time in the electric industry and an exciting time here in California. So we sit here today with about a third of the energy that goes over our system from qualifying renewables, but also really importantly, that's about 70% greenhouse gas free. So when we focus on the objective of trying to drive down carbon in our economy, lead the way on carbon reduction across all of California, you know, the electric sector here is pointing the way to success. We've got significant deployment of grid scale renewables. We have traditional clean energy resources that continue to provide. And at the same time, we're seeing a transformation where really the customer is coming to the table and is becoming an equal player, not just a consumer or an off-taker off the grid, but is really an equal player now. The 300,000 rooftop solar systems that we have in our service territory are just sort of scratching that surface, because when you think about it, a rooftop solar system under today's sort of structure and market is a great way for an individual customer to see the benefits of, you know, reducing their grid needs and generating their own clean energy. That's a great thing. But when the entire model of the grid is the idea that when we connect to each other, when we build an integrated network, we can achieve more benefits for all of us through that network and that integration. And we're now on the cusp, I think, of understanding how do we unlock the value of these distributed resources beyond just what they may be for an individual consumer. You know, a storage system today in California, while we've got some really integrated, interesting and exciting new technologies, fundamentally, if you're a residential customer in California, you're not really likely to want to buy a storage system unless you just want one, because the grid is a free battery for you. You know, if you have excess energy to generate in the middle of the day, you push it onto the grid, you can take it off whenever you want. But as we start to think about how that system could drive grid value, there's huge opportunity. And I want to mention one quick pilot we're doing in San Jose. So in San Jose, we're putting together virtually all these technologies together. We're partnering with Tesla, Green Charge Networks, and GE, we're putting together solar, smart inverters, storage at both homes and commercial centers, and we're using GE's DERMS system to actually manage all these things collectively now. So for the first time, I think, in this system, we're truly seeing what the grid of the future is, how these distributed resources can actually play and contribute to solve for a bigger problem. It's incredibly exciting. There's so much opportunity in front of us, but we also have to recognize that while markets move at the pace of innovation, oftentimes in the electric sector, we move at the pace of regulation. Slightly different pace. And we got to work to bring those two together so that we can actually unlock all that value.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought up pace, and I think also we want to talk a little bit about how to scale, right? Because I think pilots are really important. We fund a lot of demonstration projects in Hawaii and across the Asia Pacific. We really believe in the need to show things, technology in action and get measurable impacts and metrics. But it's also about how you scale that up and actually integrate this into networks. And you guys have really been thinking a lot about this in Nevada and throughout your work.
Well, in fact, that's one of the reasons we host the National Clean Energy Summit every year. And this year's theme is integrating innovation. And the reason I chose that theme was exactly the issues you have, which I think the electricity sector in particular there's more innovation coming online or coming out there and is available to use than in almost any other sector. But the question is, how do you actually integrate it into existing incumbent systems? And there are institutional issues, there are cost issues, there are basic regulatory issues. I mean, there are things like a smart grid or a smart meter. You put a smart meter on your house, and it is possible that in a year or two that smart meter is outdated because the technology is changing so quickly. So how do you actually recoup the costs of a technology that's obsolete in a much shorter time frame than what a utility is used to dealing with? And then how do you do that integration in a way that actually allows you to take full advantage of the benefits while protecting your system against some of the threats that some of these new technologies raise?
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about how specifically to do that, especially around this question of short-term investment, long-term investment? This is something you guys dealt with at the Navy every day.
Sure. Just a preliminary comment, how the grid powers innovation is reversible as well, how innovation is revolutionizing the grid, some of the comments that Steve made. So show of hands very quickly, and do not raise your hand if you're in PG&E service territory. How many people have ever woken up one morning and didn't have power? Wow, really reliable. So it gets you really innovative, doesn't it?
Why didn't you want to ask the PG&E people? They would have even less.
So you get really innovative when you don't have power. Like, how am I going to make that cup of coffee? Or how am I going to communicate? How am I going to charge my iPhone or whatever? And that is right at the heart of the grid needs to be safe, reliable, affordable, clean, and increasingly resilient. Think about what's happened in the southern part of the United States with the hurricanes this year. And the way that that grid becomes more resilient is through innovation. Once you have more choices, as Steve pointed out, from that grid, you can really take off on new business models, the adoption of new technology faster. So it's really, really a key point that it works both ways. The other point is that probably the greatest innovation that is happening out there related to the grid is where megabits meet megawatts. The deployment of information technology in the sensing and control system, our ability to grab big data, produce big data, to manipulate it, use machine learning and predictive analytics is just increasing the efficiency, lowering the cost, and increasing the reliability and resilience of the grid.
So are we using data to the extent we can to really power this innovation and this change on the grid? And if not, what else can be done, either in terms of data transparency or data work within the utilities or utility teams to better unlock this sort of data revolution that we see coming?
Well, I'll start.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, it's interesting because I find that there's generally two types of audiences I talk to. One of the ones, like this one, where we're really thinking about advanced data, we're thinking about how we utilize them. The other is places where we're still debating, should we actually install smart meters? And, candidly, it really starts with capturing data in order to use the data. And the ability to start bringing sensing and monitoring technology onto the grid is critical. You know, Denny, what you mentioned, PG&E, we've got about 25% of our circuits that we've now really brought to a high level of automation, sensing and control, self-healing capabilities. That's saving 1.6 million customer minutes of outage. I mean, it drives real reliability to customers every day. Smart meter data has been phenomenally effective at helping us also know how we should best design our system to how customers are actually using the system every day. You know, historically in the electric sector, you really use some significant engineering assumptions to build out a robust system that you ensure always has the capacity to deliver for customers. With smart meters, you start to get insight into what's actually happening in real time on the system, not what you assumed. And that translation and transition from moving of a world of assumption to world of data and reality offers huge benefits in how the system can run and what you can do with it.
What can we be doing better in that transition or in that use of data? Either Steve or Karen.
I think you know, you've spoken about it from the utility perspective, and there's certainly within the utility model, there are a whole range across your operational space where better use of data will actually save you money. But actually better use of data will actually reduce carbon emissions and allow the consumers to save money too. So you look at some of the really innovative customer service applications that are being developed, and I always give a lot of credit to the rural co-ops for some of the work that they're doing in harvesting the data and allowing that their customers to use the data. And then some of the low-income consumer programs that they've instituted, which you know, you may have trouble paying your utility bill, but most people, regardless of their income levels, have a smartphone. And there are programs that allow low-income people to do prepaid bills, but then to monitor their electricity use over the course of a day and a week, and then reduce the shutoffs that the consumers experience because they're actually actively managing their electricity as a result of having access to data that they didn't have before. So I think we have to think about data not just from the engineering perspective, but across the range of ways that we can, the platform that the electricity sector now provides for us.
Yeah, I mean, this gets me thinking about something else too, which I think the data is one piece, but as it comes into an organization, this actually has to do with how organizations are structured and where it goes in and whether we have the right talent and in the right places or stovepipes that can handle data and find these particular areas of value. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what you're thinking about organizationally and how you've seen that the organization of PG&E has to adapt for the future.
Yeah, and I mean, organization is really critical. And we need to remember that utilities have a really critical objective. If you are an engineer working at PG&E on asset management systems, your job is to make sure those lights always stay on. We really want to make sure we're protecting the system because reliability societally is so critical. As you said, we see what happens when society loses power, and it's something we can't let happen. But we also realized if you want to drive innovation on the system, you need to sort of pull a team out from that existing structure and the challenge of the day-to-day work on running the system. You need to pull out your best and brightest. You need to pull them together in a different structure with a different goal. Their goal is to learn. The goal is to push the boundary of what we can do, to do it in safe ways, to find places to demonstrate it and learn, not just go kind of whole hog and blind into it, but to get the real data, the real facts. We actually created a team we call Grid Integration and Innovation. And we pulled people out of our asset management team, we pulled people out of our energy supply team, we pulled people out of our customer-facing teams, and we put them together with a different objective. Re-envision what the grid could look like and understand what will it take. What kinds of technology have to come together? How do we know it will work? How do we prove it? How do we show it so that the world can see it, so that we can justify changing our core system to actually deliver on that? It's been a phenomenally successful team because they really helped us look differently. They're managing that San Jose pilot I mentioned earlier. And the goal of the San Jose pilot is not just to do a pilot, it's to prove it out so that we can then build it into the base system. And we've got more coming. So I really do think it takes a special team with the right structure, the right people, and the freedom to think differently.
Steve really makes a great, powerful point, and it is all about people after all. If you imagine yourself 50,000 feet looking down on, or out in outer space, looking down on the grid, you would be able to see with the right kind of data, the right kind of analytics, the right kind of machine learning, and ultimately artificial intelligence, where are the pain points? Where are the congestion points? Where are the all too frequent failures? Where is there excess capacity? How can we add efficiency to the grid in delivering all of the innovation services that are necessary for our business, for our quality of life, and indeed, from my background, for our national security?
I think there's one more piece of the organizational issue, which is governance. Because this new grid is really it's hard to distinguish, and you talk about looking at it from the top down. It's very hard to distinguish where a distribution system, which is state, and a transmission system, which is federal regulatory, actually ends anymore. And this idea of data moving from the consumer all the way through the utility to a regional transmission organization is really blurring the lines between federal and state jurisdiction in a way that is, in some instances, preventing us from really taking full advantage of the opportunities that we have here.
Not sounding too cynical or anything, but in reflecting back on Steve's opening comment, how the grid powers innovation and how regulation disables innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to just add, because I think it's important. You know, regulators, my regulatory friends here in California have a very difficult job. Because you know, not only do we have to try and understand the changes and the structures that are happening, but at the same time, we can't lose sight of the vital role that regulation plays to ensure that the system stays safe and reliable and ensure everyone comes along. Because you know, the fact is, in California today, in PG&E's service territory, 45% of our customers make less than $60,000 a year. We have 1.4 million of our 5 million customers who are eligible for our low-income programs here in California. We cannot claim that we have a sustainable economy in California unless it's affordable for all of them, unless all of us collectively come along together. And you know, the regulators have an important job to make sure that all customers are protected and we all come along together. So I do think we have to speed up the pace of regulation, but we can't do it at the expense of making sure that we bring everyone along on this journey.
I want to drill into this question on people a little bit more. And Denny, you and I have had this discussion quite a bit of how do you actually create incentives so people can take risk that's calculated, but understand and sort of play around with some of these new structures and what's coming up. And I was struck, one of the utilities that we work with asked us recently to set up a bunch of meetings with Google and Nest, but not about their energies, but really just their HR people. How do you actually create incentives for innovation? Right. How do you create environments where people can try new things and take calculated risk in a good way? And I'm curious if we could talk a little bit about that, and I want to also see what are the right incentives that we're putting in place for these new teams within utilities that can help people break through the mold.
Pilot programs are fantastic. They need to be at a large enough scale that ultimately, if they work, you can scale it up to the entire system, but they need to be narrow enough so that people are pushing the envelope, if you will, for innovation and doing things differently. But that is a way to accelerate the pace of innovation. You gain confidence as you have experience with a pilot program, whether it's how you interconnect various customers, how you manage demand on the one side, how you can optimize best value, least cost generation on the other side. But pilots are a good way to create that environment in which people can experiment a little bit.
I will say, I think this issue is a really critical one. Traditionally in utility environments, you know, you think about how people are incented. People are incented to make sure we succeed. Remember those folks I talked about? You're not incented to let the lights go out. You're incented to keep them on, stay on budget, you know, meet your targets. And one of the things I talk a lot to our team about is if we're not failing some, we're not succeeding. If we don't see failure, we're not pushing ourselves hard enough. Now, it's our job to make sure we manage failure, that we don't fail for our customers, but that, you know, if we're not going into programs thinking this is going to work and finding out it doesn't, then we're not pushing hard enough to see what's out there. So creating the incentives to fail fast and turn failure into success is a big deal. And frankly, I'm not sure we even have the answers for it yet. I'd like to go talk to some of those folks at Google, too, to figure out how you can help me out on that one. Because I think that HR system of helping people understand that it's the right thing to push. It's the right thing to push beyond what normal success might look like and to learn from that failure. So shifting the success or shifting the metric and the incentive, not just to get the task done, but what did we learn from that task? And if we learned, then we advanced, we succeeded.
Yeah, it's easier said than done to have the confidence of that your leadership will stand up behind you when that
Absolutely.
stuff happens, right? And that those feedback loops are built into the system.
But I also think that you're dealing with you're a regulated industry, and a lot of the change that's happening in the grid is coming from third-party providers and the innovators, and they are just operating in a different environment than you are. And so providing those regulated entities that have a responsibility and a relationship, and we were talking about the regulatory compact, providing you some space to be able to do some of the things that you might do that can reward a risk. Because in many instances, in many states, the utility is actually prevented from doing some of the things that the third-party providers are jumping into.
It all depends on what you want to do and where you want to do it. Right, reflecting back on my experience in the Navy, we really encouraged innovation. We didn't encourage failure, but we tolerated it in information technology, command control, communications. We did not encourage any innovation in operating nuclear-powered submarines or nuclear-powered aircraft carriers.
Exactly.
Guys, don't be innovative here. We stick to the procedures and the tried and true. So it depends on what business you're in, what function, what mission, and sometimes taking a typical Silicon Valley company, whether it's a startup or well-established company, and trying to apply some of the principles that have made them successful to the grid, it isn't a good match. In some cases it is, but you have to be really discriminating about what are the things that you really can gain a lot quickly from innovation.
Thank you for a reminder there, because just to be clear, we don't encourage our nuclear employees to fail either, nor our asset management teams. You're exactly right.
I want to go back to something you were saying about how utilities can look at other models, and you have some experience specifically in Chattanooga around this, utilities they're thinking out of the box, and specifically around economic development and powering economic development innovation.
And I think one of the mega trends in the grid are digitization, but also convergence. And we're seeing this convergence happening with electricity in the transportation system. You've heard homes talking about electric vehicles, but also with telecommunications. In fact, in many places that you can't distinguish between telecommunications and the electricity network. And in Chattanooga, they used Recovery Act money, the utility EPB, to install broadband network to all of its consumers and customers. And at one point 20 years ago, Chattanooga was one of the dirtiest, poorest cities in the country. And it's gone through this renaissance where it's always listed as one of the top 10 smallest cities in the country to live in. And that investment in broadband, they wanted to be a 1 gigabyte city. They're now a 10 gigabyte city, has led to this kind of real renaissance in downtown Chattanooga with small clean tech companies. eBay is there. And there's an issue where the example of convergence. And as a result of that investment by the utility, it shows that the grid can really be a platform for economic drivers. And this is one of my big concerns when you see the grid as this platform for incredible growth, is that just outside the footprint of EPB, it's still Chattanooga or Chattanooga outskirts, but there are floral companies that have dial-up internet. And the disparities that we can create as we watch the grid grow and change, I think is something we really have to pay attention to.
You mean there's something beyond dial-up internet?
That's true.
I got to check into that.
In Nevada, there are places where you're lucky if you've got dial-up.
So I think that's a really good note to end on, because as we think through what we're doing with the grid and innovation, we have to also keep the big picture in mind. I mean, just yesterday we heard the announcement from our Governor Ige of the great state of Hawaii, joined 13 other governors in Puerto Rico, saying that these states are on track to meet the Paris agreements, and that the states that are part of the U.S. Climate Alliance have actually grown significantly faster, about 2 times faster than the states that are not part of the alliance, while reducing their emissions by 15% as opposed to 10% for the other states. So as we're decoupling some of this economic growth from carbon emissions, I think that's one of the things that we're thinking about from a big picture perspective. I mean, we're not doing innovation for innovation's sake. We're not sort of messing with the grid for that sake. We have some big goals in mind here, and these are all ways that we can help get there by working with people and innovation and really working together collaboratively. So please join me in thanking our panelists and our conversation today. It's a pleasure to work with all of you.